What if I told you a forgotten passport helped create one of the greatest partnerships in hard rock history? A band that would sell more than 20 million records, tour arenas across America, and influence generations of metal legends. Yet, just as everything finally worked, the genius behind their sound quietly walked away, muttering the words, "Poor, poor, rock bottom." This is the rise and fall of UFO. London, 1968. Britain was still riding the psychedelic wave that bands like Pink Floyd had unleashed in smoky underground clubs. While many musicians chased colorful lights and cosmic sounds, three working-class teenagers from North London were trying to build something louder and tougher. Their names were Phil Mogg, Pete Way, and Andy Parker. Like many young bands, they started small. Cheap instruments, borrowed amplifiers, and long nights playing tiny pubs where half the crowd was more interested in drinking than listening. At first, the group called themselves Hocus Pocus. It sounded strange, but strange was normal in the late 1960s when psychedelic rock ruled everything. Still, the band wanted something bigger, something mysterious, something that hinted at the strange atmosphere of the underground scene they loved. So they changed the name to UFO. The name was not actually about aliens. It was a tribute to the famous UFO Club in London, one of the most important psychedelic venues in the city. Bands like Pink Floyd had built their reputation there. By taking the name, Mogg and his bandmates were connecting themselves to that same rebellious underground movement. But ambition does not guarantee success. Their first album, UFO 1, arrived in 1970. The music leaned heavily into space rock. Long songs stretched out with swirling guitars and strange sound effects. The follow-up record, UFO 2, Flying, released the next year, pushed even deeper into experimental territory. There was just one problem. Almost nobody cared. The British music press barely mentioned the albums. Radio stations ignored them completely. In America, the records quietly disappeared without leaving any trace. For a young band trying to survive, that kind of silence can end everything. But something unexpected happened. While Britain ignored UFO, fans in other parts of the world began to notice them. Their strange mixture of heavy riffs and psychedelic jams connected with audiences overseas. Japan and Germany, in particular, started building a loyal following for the band. Suddenly, UFO had an opportunity they never expected. In 1971, they traveled to Japan and recorded a live concert in Tokyo. The album captured something the studio recordings had struggled to show: energy. On stage, the band sounded louder, heavier, and far more dangerous. The live album became popular in Germany and even reached the top 30 there. For the first time, UFO realized their real power might not be in the studio, it might be on stage. But one problem still threatened everything: the guitar. And the search for the right guitarist was about to change rock history forever. Germany, 1973. UFO had built a modest following across Europe, especially in Germany. The crowds were bigger there, the fans louder, and for the first time the band felt like they were climbing somewhere. But behind the scenes, they were still searching for something crucial: the right guitarist. Bernie Marsden had been handling the job during the tour. He was talented and dependable, but even Marsden could feel it. The chemistry was not quite there. The band sounded good, but not explosive. Something was missing. Then, disaster struck. Just before one of their German shows, Marsden realized something terrible. His passport was still sitting back in London. Without it, he could not cross the border to perform. Suddenly, UFO faced a nightmare scenario. No guitarist, no show, no money. For a band already struggling financially, canceling a concert could be devastating. But the tour had an opening act, a young German band called Scorpions, and their lead guitarist was only 18 years old. His name was Michael Schenker. UFO barely knew him. He spoke almost no English, and the band spoke almost no German. But desperation makes people take risks. Someone suggested the impossible. What if the kid filled in for one night? Schenker agreed. That decision would change rock history. When he walked onto the stage that night holding his white Gibson Flying V, nobody expected much. After all, he was just a teenager, filling in for a band he barely knew. But the moment he plugged in and played the first riff, something shocking happened. Everything clicked. The precision of his playing was unbelievable. Every note landed perfectly. His solos were fast but melodic, technical but emotional. Even with the language barrier, the communication between the musicians became instant. It was like they had been playing together for years. The crowd felt it too. The show exploded with energy, and when the final song ended, the members of UFO looked at each other with the same thought. They had just found the missing piece. Immediately after the performance, Phil Mogg and Pete Way approached the young guitarist. They asked him the question that would define the next chapter of their careers. Would he join UFO permanently? Leaving the Scorpions was not an easy decision. That band included his older brother Rudolf Schenker. Family loyalty ran deep. But Michael heard something in UFO that he had not felt before: freedom. The band allowed him to explore his melodic guitar style in ways that other groups might restrict. They were hungry, ambitious, and ready to evolve. So, the 18-year-old guitarist made a choice that shocked many people. He left the Scorpions and joined UFO. But wait, this next part changes everything. In 1974, the new lineup entered the studio to record their next album with producer Leo Lyons, the bassist from 10 years after. From the moment the sessions began, it was clear that UFO had transformed. The psychedelic space jams were gone. In their place was something sharper, heavier, and far more focused. The album was called Phenomenon, and it introduced the world to a song that would follow the band for the rest of their career: Doctor Doctor. But the real secret weapon of the album was something even bigger: a track called Rock Bottom. And on stage, that song was about to become legendary. Phenomenon arrived in 1974 and immediately sounded different from anything UFO had done before. The long psychedelic jams were gone. In their place were tight, aggressive songs built around Michael Schenker's razor-sharp guitar playing. The album was not an instant smash on the charts, but it quietly introduced a new sound that critics and musicians began to notice. The first major anthem was Doctor Doctor. The opening guitar line was simple but unforgettable. Doctor, doctor, please, don't you know? The song told the story of a desperate man begging a doctor for help with heartbreak, and the chorus stuck in people's heads after one listen. It quickly became the band's signature song. Then there was Rock Bottom. In the studio, the track lasted only a few minutes, but live, it became something completely different. Schenker used the middle section as a launch pad for long solos that could stretch past 10 or even 15 minutes. Each night he played it differently. Some performances sounded precise and melodic. Others felt like controlled chaos. Audiences loved it. The album barely scraped the American charts, landing around the bottom of the Billboard 200. But that did not matter. UFO had finally broken into the United States, and the momentum was building. But it gets crazier. The band followed Phenomenon with Force It in 1975. This album pushed their new hard rock sound even further. Songs like Shoot Shoot and Let It Roll became staples of American rock radio. Shoot, shoot, shoot it, boy, you gotta shoot it, boy. The record climbed to number 71 on the Billboard charts, a huge improvement over their earlier releases. Suddenly, UFO was no longer a struggling underground act. They were touring America constantly, opening shows for giants like Kiss and Jethro Tull. At first, they were just the support band, warming up the crowd. But by the end of many shows, fans were leaving the arena talking about UFO instead of the headliners. The band kept the momentum going with No Heavy Petting in 1976. The album introduced keyboard textures that expanded their sound and added new layers to their music. While it did not produce a massive hit, it strengthened their reputation as a serious hard rock band. Then came 1977, and the album that many fans still consider their masterpiece, Lights Out. Produced by Ron Nevison, who had also worked with Led Zeppelin, the record captured UFO at their creative peak. The title track, Lights Out, delivered one of the heaviest riffs of the decade. The song painted a picture of chaos in London during a blackout, and the energy of the performance felt explosive. But the real surprise was Love to Love. The song slowed everything down.
Love to love you.
Blending emotional vocals, swirling keyboards, and one of Schenker's most beautiful guitar solos. It showed that UFO could be both powerful and sophisticated at the same time. The album reached number 23 in America. For the first time in their career, UFO looked like they might become true rock superstars. Arena tours followed. Fans packed venues across the United States. The band's image became iconic. Leather jackets, spandex pants, and Michael Schenker standing under the lights with his white Flying V guitar. Everything was finally working, but behind the scenes, the band was beginning to crack apart, and the tension centered around two men who could barely stand each other, Phil Mogg and Michael Schenker. By the late 1970s, UFO looked unstoppable from the outside. They had hit albums, arena tours, and a growing fan base across America and Europe. But behind the scenes, the band was becoming a pressure cooker, ready to explode. At the center of the tension were two completely different personalities, Phil Mogg and Michael Schenker. Mogg was a tough London frontman with a sharp tongue and a boxer's mentality. He grew up in rough neighborhoods and believed in pushing people hard. His humor was sarcastic, sometimes brutal, and he often used insults as a way to keep control of the band. Schenker was the opposite. He was quiet, sensitive, and intensely focused on music. Even though he was one of the most gifted guitarists of his generation, he struggled with severe stage fright. The pressure of touring across the world terrified him. To cope, he relied on medication and isolation. At first, the differences between the two men seemed manageable. But as UFO's success grew, so did the stress. Mogg's constant teasing began to feel less like jokes and more like attacks. Schenker absorbed the criticism quietly, but the damage slowly built up, and sometimes the arguments turned physical. Stories circulated among road crews and fans about backstage fights between the singer and the guitarist. Mogg later admitted that their relationship was explosive, though he tried to downplay some of the more extreme rumors. But that was only part of the chaos, because the band's reputation for wild behavior was legendary, and nobody embodied that reputation more than bassist Pete Way. Way lived the full rock and roll lifestyle without limits. Parties lasted all night, alcohol flowed constantly, drugs were everywhere. Even by the outrageous standards of 1970s rock bands, Pete Way stood out. Ozzy Osbourne once joked that Way partied harder than almost anyone he had ever seen. Let me tell you this, that is saying something. Eventually, Sharon Osbourne even banned Ozzy from hanging around with UFO because their lifestyle had become too dangerous. While the wild image made great stories, it also caused serious problems. Recording sessions became unpredictable. Tour schedules slipped. Money disappeared faster than anyone expected. The band was still functioning, but barely. Every show felt like it might be the last. Then, in 1978, UFO recorded what would become their most famous release, a live album captured during concerts in Chicago and Louisville. The record was called Strangers in the Night, and when it was released in early 1979, it instantly became one of the most celebrated live albums in rock history. The record captured everything that made UFO special: the explosive energy of Lights Out, the crowd shouting along to Dr. Doctor, and the extended solo masterpiece of Rock Bottom, where Michael Schenker's guitar soared through the arena like a rocket. Fans loved it. Critics praised it. The album climbed to number 7 in the United Kingdom and entered the American charts as well. UFO had finally reached the moment they had been chasing for more than a decade. But wait, this next part changes everything. Because just as the band stood on the edge of global superstardom, their greatest musician quietly walked away. And he did it over one song, Rock Bottom. The success of Strangers in the Night should have been the moment everything finally came together for UFO. After years of grinding through small clubs and endless tours, they had produced a live album that many critics called one of the greatest in rock history. The crowds were growing. The American market was opening wide. For the first time, Stadium-level success seemed possible. But behind the scenes, Michael Schenker was struggling more than anyone realized. The pressure of fame weighed heavily on him. Touring non-stop had drained his energy. His stage fright never truly disappeared, even though fans saw only confidence when he stepped into the spotlight with that white flying V. And then came the mixing sessions. The band gathered at the Record Plant studio in New York to finalize Strangers in the Night. Producer Ron Nevison worked carefully to capture the raw energy of the concerts while polishing the sound for release. Most of the band loved what they heard, but Schenker did not. During playback of Rock Bottom, he noticed something that bothered him deeply. In the middle of the performance, he believed he had played several wrong notes during one of the extended solos. To most listeners, the mistakes were impossible to hear. The performance sounded incredible, but to Schenker, they were glaring flaws. He insisted on re-recording the guitar parts. Nevison refused. From the producer's perspective, the recording was already perfect. The emotion and spontaneity of the live performance mattered more than technical perfection. Fixing small details would destroy the authenticity of the moment. The argument grew louder. Schenker repeated that the notes were wrong. He said the mistakes would haunt him every time the album played. Nevison held his ground. The record was finished. Finally, the young guitarist stood up. He shook his head quietly and said the words that would become legendary. Poor, poor Rock Bottom. Then he walked out of the studio. Just like that, Michael Schenker left UFO. The timing could not have been worse. The band had momentum, respect, and the strongest album of their career. Yet the man responsible for their signature guitar sound was suddenly gone. For fans, the news felt shocking. For the band, it felt devastating. Years of tension between Schenker and Phil Mogg had slowly built toward this moment. The pressure of touring, the arguments, and the constant emotional strain had finally pushed the guitarist too far. And now, UFO faced an impossible question. How do you replace the musician who helped define your entire sound? The answer came from someone who had briefly crossed their path before: Paul Chapman. Chapman had already filled in for the band during earlier tours, and he was known as a reliable, energetic guitarist. His playing style was less precise than Schenker's, but more aggressive and direct. UFO decided to move forward with him. But what happened next surprised everyone, because the band managed to secure one of the most respected producers in music history for their next album, a man who had helped shape the sound of the Beatles. His name was George Martin, and his experience working with UFO would become something he later regretted. Paul Chapman stepped into UFO at the most difficult moment in the band's history. Replacing Michael Schenker was not just a lineup change. It was like replacing the engine of a race car while the race was still happening. Still, the band pushed forward. For their next album, they made a surprising move. They hired one of the most respected producers in music history, George Martin. Yes, the same George Martin who had produced the Beatles. At first, the partnership sounded like a dream. Martin was known for discipline, musical precision, and studio innovation. UFO hoped he could guide them into their next phase and help them break into even bigger success. But from the beginning, the collaboration felt strange. Martin was known for calm professionalism. He preferred organized studio sessions, clean arrangements, and musicians who followed a strict schedule. UFO was the opposite. They were loud, chaotic, and unpredictable. Nights often ended at bars instead of hotel rooms. Studio sessions could stretch into arguments or wild parties. The contrast between the polished producer and the reckless rock band became impossible to ignore. Still, the album moved forward. Released in 1980, No Place to Run showed a more polished version of UFO. Songs like Young Blood and the title track No Place to Run proved the band could still write strong rock songs, even without Schenker. The album reached number 11 in the United Kingdom, but something important had changed. The raw electricity that defined earlier records like Lights Out and Phenomenon felt softer. Some fans liked the cleaner sound. Others felt the band had lost the dangerous edge that once made them special. George Martin later admitted the experience had been difficult. The refined producer and the hard-living rock band simply came from different worlds. In later interviews, he even said he regretted working in heavy rock, describing the genre as something he never fully connected with. That comment did not help UFO's reputation. As the 1980s continued, the band struggled to maintain their momentum. Albums like The Wild, The Willing, and The Innocent and Mechanics leaned toward a more commercial sound. Some songs gained radio play, but longtime fans felt the band was drifting away from its roots. Then, another major blow arrived. In 1982, Pete Way left the band. For UFO, that loss was enormous. Way had been there from the beginning. His bass playing, wild personality, and unmistakable stage presence were part of the band's identity. Without him, the chemistry felt different. By 1983, the band released Making Contact, but the record failed to gain traction. Sales were weak. Touring became harder. The momentum they once had was gone. After 15 years together, UFO finally collapsed and disbanded. But here's where it gets wild. Even as the band faded from the spotlight, their influence was exploding. Steve Harris of Iron Maiden often pointed to UFO as a major inspiration, especially the way their songs shifted between heavy riffs and melodic passages. James Hetfield of Metallica famously chose the Flying V guitar because of Michael Schenker. Bands like Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, and even Slayer carried pieces of UFO's sound into the next generation of metal. The band reunited several times over the decades, including a 1991 album called Walk on Water that briefly brought Michael Schenker back.
A greedy, nasty, selfish little man who could never have.
But instability followed him again, and he soon left once more. By the 2010s, UFO had become a respected legacy act, still touring with Phil Mogg as the only constant member since the beginning. Then, in 2018, Mogg announced his retirement. A farewell tour called Last Orders was planned, giving fans one final chance to see the band live. But health problems eventually forced the tour to end early. By 2024, Mogg confirmed what many already expected. UFO was officially finished. 5 classic albums, more than 20 million records sold, a sound that helped shape heavy metal, all born from a forgotten passport, and a guitarist who walked away at the exact moment the world was finally listening.